Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on how low-code enables development teams to deliver modern UX. This is Christina Cardoza, news editor of SC Times. Before we get started, I have a couple of quick housekeeping announcements. First, if at any time you have any questions about or during the presentation, you may submit them using the Control Panel's Questions tab. Secondly, this webinar will be recorded and available on demand through the sctimes.com website in about 24 hours after the event. Here at SC Times, we've been writing about the importance of low-code development as a way to speed up development and stay ahead of the competition. This webinar will explore how low-code helps you take a modern approach to building UX without sacrificing app delivery times. Here to talk about this more is Joao Granzina, Product Manager of OutSystems, Gonzalo Borgata, Head of Product for OutSystems, and Rachel Bates, Associate Product Manager for bswift. Now to get things started, I'll turn it over to you, Joao.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. So let's get started right away, just to cover a little bit of what we'll be discussing here today. First of all, we thought it would be interesting to have a quick recap of why you need to really care about UX, why it is important for you and your organization, and what are some of the common challenges and struggles that organizations face when trying to do proper UX. And then trying to maybe simplify it a little bit, simplify UX for the rest of us, software engineers, application leaders, architects even, so delivery teams that are trying to come up with the best solutions and struggling with some of these problems. And then basically go through how low-code can really help you in this process to come up with the best solutions for your customers through great experiences. So getting started, if you look into some of the research that has been done on how the customer experience leaders, the ones that have more impact through their UX experiences, through their investments in defining customer journeys, through defining the best solutions for their customer experience, and the impact they have in their business according and comparing to other organizations that maybe don't give as much attention, you'll see that the top leaders have much better outcomes in terms of their business. Some of them get to increase revenue by numbers close to up to 40%. They have triple the returns of the average organization, and this is really because UX impacts a lot areas, both in the top line and in the bottom line, in how they do business with their customers. So looking into a little bit more details in terms of customer experience, so B2C portals, B2C applications, this has a lot of impact in both the revenue and the loyalty of your customers. If your customers have a great experience in your application, in your portal, they're more propelled to buy, to use your products versus your competition. It helps you remove obstacles out of the way, but also as you are serving your customer from your front office, like in help desk, in support functions, in terms of customer satisfaction, this also has a great impact. If you can provide a great experience, either self-service or supported by your call centers, for instance, and if they're very productive, they have the information at hand to do their tasks, you can provide a much better service. But also in terms of operations, so if you think about operations, all the impacts that this can have in the productivity of your end users, simplifying sometimes very simple tasks that basically take all the struggles out of the way, it really gets you to bring more productivity to your end users, to save costs in a lot of the processes that are usually very bloated within the organization, and overall have more employee satisfaction, have people more willing to come to work every day and fulfill their jobs. So the problems with this is that this has a lot to do with how you think about the solutions that you are delivering. And at the core of this, we see one skill, if you want, which is empathy. And empathy is really one of the core things that you need to look into all the people and the processes that you have to make sure that you really understand the end user. You need to put yourself in their shoes. You need to understand how they are fulfilling a given task, a given job, and then come up with a solution that supports them in exactly what they're doing, when they are doing it, and how they are doing it. So it's not really about design. It's not really about fancy user interfaces. It's really about putting yourselves in the shoes of your end user and trying to support them the best way you can. So when you're trying to bring this to your app delivery teams, we find struggles around the usual triad of things: people, processes, and technology. So just before going deep into them, what we would like to do here is really ask you, and what do you feel are your main challenges when trying to roll out UX in your organization? How do you feel this is being hard for you, and what's related to that? So let's just make sure that the poll is launched. So if we already have all the questions or all the answers in this case. All right. So interesting. It seems that the biggest struggle is really on not having enough UX resources or the skills in the team, and that you also lack some of the tools that help you iterate faster. So, okay, let's maybe close the poll and go back to our session. So let me go through some of these challenges. Like you said, actually one of the biggest issues is that you either don't have the skills in your delivery team, you don't know how to do this, or if you already have a dedicated UX team or some people included in your team, you don't have enough capacity for all the things that you need to do and for all the projects that you have in place. It's also interesting that to see that there's a common misunderstanding of how UX is very different from other abilities such as visual design and so on. UX people and UX skills are really about looking into how you can solve problems for the users, empathizing with their needs, and then iterating a lot with the solution. And another problem that is very common is that UX is very often a latecomer, if ever considered. Sometimes we try to do UX work at the very end of the project. At the very end, you won't have time to solve any particular issues, and it's not really a first tier solution or consideration in everything that you do. And sometimes you don't even have enough sponsoring across all levels, right? People are waiting for the project to be delivered, for the solution to be created, without even thinking enough about the need to have a better look into the problem that you're trying to solve. This also has a lot to do with the methodologies that you employ. We see still a lot of projects being very waterfallish, or people applying agile, but really internal agile, like delivery teams working internally to come up with the result at the end of the sprint, but then there are no recurrent testings with the end users. And overall quality is usually measured in defects, whether the software was correctly implemented according to whatever requirements you might have in place, instead of how is the software really satisfying the outcomes that you set up in the beginning to solve. The other problem is around technology, and technology comes in different flavors. The first problem is that you usually, to run this process, you need to bundle a lot of tools. A lot of tools requires also a lot of skills, different skills for each tool, very often, some to design, some to prototype, different tools to build and to develop your project across the entire stack, then different tools to ensure that you can easily deploy that solution to the hands of your end users, and then even more different tools to monitor how applications are doing, what is the feedback from the users, and support that iterative process. Another problem, a little bit more refined, is that when you're trying to come up with these solutions, you always start from scratch. You often don't have UI frameworks, UX frameworks, even in terms of processes, to reuse across projects. So it's very common that you'll end up with lack of UX capacity, right? Because everybody needs to reinvent everything from project to project. And in the end, if you don't have a really quick way to go from idea to production, test it, and then iterate, meaning that you don't have a good CI/CD process that ensures that you continuously deliver changes to your software, you'll end up with a lot of these challenges. So to talk a little bit about this, I would like to also ask Rachel, how do you see these challenges in your organization? Do you identify yourself with some of them as you were trying to roll out your UX processes?
Hi, yes. So I came to bswift about a year and a half ago, and our UX team was relatively young at the time as well in terms of coming up with the process for how we go about with our UX team. And I kind of boiled this down into 4 big challenges that I saw. One of them was the timing. When does UX get brought into the development life cycle? That was still a little unclear. Ownership. Who has final say over those design decisions if you're coming up with multiple iterations? The collaboration, how can we make the UX process more collaborative between the designers and the product managers? And then capacity. We have so many projects, but we only have so many people on our team for the UX. So what's the capacity level there? How many projects can we take on without overworking our staff?
All right, so thank you, Rachel. So I think it matches some of the key challenges that we see here. So let's try to simplify this a little bit to the day-to-day work that all of us need to do. So let me go back to how I see a lot of organizations doing app delivery and eventually trying to bring in UX. First of all, it's common that you ask your product managers, project managers, product owners, whoever is controlling the requirements to get your requirements in place, right? They usually look into a couple of user needs. They identify a set of user stories for those different needs. And then you go and you start building according to these requirements, building, making sure that you have all those requirements gathered and tested, and then you end up deploying, right? Now, if you think about UX, this is really about increasing the reach to different personas, to their very, very specific needs, to what they need to do, where and when they need to do it, and to come up with solutions for each one of their individual problems. And usually what happens is that, well, you end up with a lot more user stories. And as you try to bring this within your process, as engineers specifically, as software developers, we tend to try to reuse as much as possible, right? We try to be able to standardize and cope with all of these requirements to create a solid architecture, a solid information architecture, but then we try to reuse a lot of what we've done. So the iteration goes a little bit about building, but then maybe modularizing something to reuse in other screens that do the same thing. And in the end, we end up with a solution that covers all of the requirements. Now, the problem with this is that one size won't usually fit all scenarios, right? And you can look at this process and understand that it is not very different, and it will not have a very different outcome from everything that we were doing before in these large systems, right? It's easy to create a very simple use case, but when you, for instance, you start getting into enterprise applications, a lot of requirements, a lot of data, a lot of business rules, then you end up trying to package everything, all those requirements within the same single screen, within the same single use case. And it's very common to see how this creates very, very bad results and very big problems in terms of user experience. Eventually, even, for instance, in hospital management systems, the lack of a proper UX even gets people to die because they were not able to see an alert. And this has a lot to do with us trying to simplify and put everything in one place that can be reused so that we can accommodate all those different requirements that come out of our backlog. So first thing here is that we need to do is that we need to forget our computer sciences background, where everything either does not exist, either we have one implementation, or we need to come up with an implementation that solves all problems in the most efficient way. UX is really not about that. You can have 1, 2, 3, 50 implementations to 50 different use cases because they need to be really designed for that goal. And try not to fall in the same mistake of those systems that you're being asked to modernize, right? If a lot of the times we're rebuilding systems that went outdated, are very hard to change, are not usable, but as we pile up requirements, we end up with systems that are very similar. So first rule, and the most important rule of all for a great UX is that you really need to design your systems, your use cases, in terms of being fit for purpose of exactly what that user needs in that specific situation. Okay, so what's the problem with this? The problem is that instead of having like 50 user stories, you end up with different users having completely different needs, and you need to basically support a lot of use cases, especially the ones that are very specific to very individual use cases, either in web or in mobile, in a very specific micro moment. For instance, when someone is in the field and is trying to read something for a tire, like we've seen in the other picture, this adds up a lot of requirements that are very hard to accommodate in your project. So the other thing is that you need to look into the entire journey. So it's not about simple requirements for each user. You need to understand how they tie together with each one. And here, a strong tool is really designing that customer journey, understanding the processes that the user has to fulfill their needs. And it's very important to understand that the journey are not the IT processes, right? The journey is really what the customer, what the user is trying to fulfill. And eventually you can simplify that journey very heavily by implementing, again, a very fit-to-purpose solution to that very micro moment that he has in his journey. So you need to understand the job that he's trying to do. You need to understand where is he trying to do it, because the solution might be completely different depending on, for instance, whether he needs to go out of his office to do his work, but also when is he trying to do it, right? What is the sequence of events? Where is he coming from, and what will he need to do next? So just thinking about, again, putting yourself in the shoes of your users and understanding what you want to do. Now, UXers, they are great at this, right? They focus on this and they look into this with a very scientific approach. But what we believe is that you can really do the 80-20 just by following some simple steps. And we have some guidelines in some of the material that we're sharing here that give you like very synthesized guidelines on how you can make this very simple. The other thing is about iteration. Iteration, because you won't get it right at the first time, right? You'll come up with a solution, eventually a fit-for-purpose solution, but you won't know if it's right until you put it in the hands of your users. So the first thing you need to understand and that you need to actually demand from your project managers is what are the outcomes that we want to have? How much do we want to simplify that process for that particular user, that task for that particular user? And that's what should be guiding you towards your goals, right? It's not just having the solution or the capability, the feature in your application. It's really about solving that outcome. And then try to very quickly get a prototype with real data, ideally, so that your users can relate to it and get it into his hands. Because the faster you get it into your users' hands, the faster you'll fail, right? You'll understand that you'll never get it right at the first time. So, and UX is really about this, is understanding what are the small failures that we have in supporting the user in their tasks, and then just iterating. And don't be scared about this. Don't think that this is going to create a big overhead in your project, because it has been proven that most of the issues related to the experience, related to supporting your users in the best way, they can be found, and then you can easily solve them by running a usability test with 5 users, 5 to 7 users. So it's really just getting out of your seat, testing that solution with a couple of people, and then being able to iterate it and solve it. So, Rachel, would like to understand a little bit, and according to some of these guidelines, what were the things that you implemented at bswift to really get this 80-20 in place?
Yep. Yeah, sure. So we kind of came up with 6 steps that we go through before we go to the development process. So in the next slide, I can show you the high level of what we'll go through, and then each of those steps, I have another slide for that as well. So our UX processes, first we create a creative brief. We, meaning the product managers, create a brief for the UX team to go over together before we decide to iterate on the problem at hand. Then we sketch with the UX team. We bring those sketches into Hi-Fi UX mockups. Then we do our user testing, and we create design adjustments based on user testing results. And then we finalize those designs. And to solve our timing issue, we always bring this in before we do any development on our projects as well. So this is a creative brief. The creative brief is just a document that we go through with a set level of questions that states the problem, and then how that problem is trying to be solved today, and if it is being solved at all, or if it's a new project, the target users and audience, and then determine how the success will be measured of the project as well, so we can determine if we have to iterate on that further, and any key dates that the project will be going live. On the right-hand side, I have a screenshot of some wireframes that I included in this document as well, so that it kind of gave a well-rounded definition of what was in my head before we went in and iterated. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So the next step was we go into Sketch together as a collaborative effort. We kind of, and these are actually live sketches from our mobile app project that we did, where you can see there's a couple of different views that we're displaying our benefits cards here. And just by sketching, we're able to iterate a lot and determine which one kind of feels right on the page, and which one we'll go through to bring into the Hi-Fi mockups in the next level. So Hi-Fi mockups, we use a program called Acture, and this is kind of nice because you can actually go through and it looks and feels like the actual mobile app itself, but it's not. If there's no coding involved, our UX designers can actually go through and make it feel like it's working. Here, within the program, you can click through the individual pages, or alternatively, you can click on the links or the buttons on the right-hand side of the screen, and it actually will move you through to each of these pages, depending on how they're linked up. This is also really good for user testing, because we had our testers go through and use this part of the mock-up and sharing with stakeholders so that they could see kind of where we are in the design process of the project. So this is a couple of live screenshots of our user testing that we did. So it was an interesting dynamic. I was able to watch this from my computer screen at my desk while these testers were using our app. So we had about, I think it was 7 users that came in, and they did not know what bswift was, and they used our app and kind of talked through as we were telling them specific actions that we wanted them to perform. We had a camera set up on their face and a camera set up on the phone so that we could see their emotion as they were navigating through the app and trying to find specific information that we were asking them to find. And again, this was the first time they had seen this, so all the feedback was being recorded by our user testers. And then those user testers were able to give us some feedback. Yeah, you can go back to that slide. Yeah, okay, thank you. They came back with a nice PowerPoint here that kind of gave us some suggestions based on what they saw in the user testing. If there were any points of confusion, or if there were things that they just flew through that were good, we should not iterate on those. From here, we took that feedback and came up with a couple more design adjustments, and then handed the hi-fi mockup off to the development team. And then because it's a hi-fi mockup, the development team is able to go through and see what happens when you hover over buttons, or the specific animation when it slides in and what happens there. Those types of references and behaviors helps the front end people know exactly what to do when they're building out the app. And this is also really helpful as a side note for the live style guide creation and out systems.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. So the next question is, how can modern UX be done with low code? How can low code help with this process? The biggest issue here is the big backlog that we've created by expanding all the use cases through the different personas. How do we release this valuable UX resource that is scarce in your organization, and have it built fit for purpose for all these roles inside the organization? Our idea is to breed these stories through commonality, to instantiate templates that are common across the exponential set of use cases inside the portfolio of your applications. For each of the individuals that you see there, there is only one specific. There is a small amount of specific screens that can actually be crafted for that person, but inside the big portfolio of your applications, these screens are small, and the most common screens they can be reached by a large portion of the portfolio. Common screens can address the majority of the portfolio. So they shouldn't have to be built over and over again. And actually, what we've seen by building these screen templates that address the largest amount of your portfolio is that they address around 70% of the screens used in the use cases that you identify across the organization. These templates, they were built with to accelerate the experience building. So weaving these screens together allow you to build a fit-for-purpose application and start experimenting with your users. And the idea here is that the experimentation should be with the users. So the sample data that these screens that we've built comes with, the screens comes with the sample data. They help keep focus on the experience first, the flow of the screens, the specific fit for purpose of that specific story for that specific user. And in a later stage, we can help by replacing the sample data by real data, and this has been made very easy with the platform. So, going a bit through these screens that we have built, we've built several categories of screens. On the dashboards, we have dashboards that are more targeted at financial kind of visualization of data. Some are more operational for ticket requests or something like that. And some are more visual in terms of showing cards or having Kanbans to show progress on a specific status. On mobile, again, accounting, but because of the specific particularities on mobile, we have at-a-glance information. We provide summaries over these kind of information, more attuned to the kind of use case you typically find in mobile, where people don't have much time or they want to have information at hand really easily. For detail screens, for instance, details over large lists to allow context not to be lost when browsing a list, or focus detailed on the product detail, for instance, that can be expanded according to the needs by changing the screens after instantiating them. We have screens focused for people, for instance, employees or contacts, and screens that are more focused on lists rather than details, or details rather than lists. On the mobile, we have specifics for currency-focused details or at-a-glance information using charts or personal information. Forms can take several shapes. For instance, they can be very simple forms, or they can be complex simulator that require advanced UI patterns that we accelerate. Not always easy to articulate in terms of componentizing the page. Also, some workflow-based inputs with controls for status or assigning tasks to specific users or work pools. The mobile has more or less the same kind of philosophy. We also have some grid layouts like galleries or catalogs or detailed card information. Some have advanced filters, some are exploratory kind of designs where you can browse information. The same thing for mobile, more simple. Lists for data-intensive representation, with or without summary UI patterns, and also some that are focused on tasks or on profiling of information. Adjusting these for mobile use cases, you see that these screens are very representative of a lot of lists kind of use cases. Also, lastly, some onboarding patterns on mobile, which are not always easy to achieve, but are very, very recurrent in the application portfolios. So we do know that UX is always tailor-made to the context. Each of the users has a specific need, and the fit for purpose is different for each and every one of them. And for that, we have a wide library of UI components that allow building this experience at a more granular level. For instance, the UI components that we offer, they're responsive and performant. They're customizable, extensible, and reusable. They can be used on the templates that we've seen before to augment the capabilities of those templates. Very importantly, they are consistent. The styles are consistent across the portfolio, like Rachel mentioned, to have these UI elements living very well with the lifestyle guides. And all patterns are ready for AAA accessibility compliance. It's become a very recurrent need from our customers. Also, we have planned to deliver the ability to allow our customers to identify their own set of patterns, screen patterns that they need to build, and augment the library that we have, that I've just shown, with specific reusable screens, customizable templates that can be used specific to the organization. So let's take a look at this in action. I'm showing the experience of building an app. This is a developer that may be sitting with the business user for the first iteration of an application, or he can have received the high-level requirements for a new user story. This example is building a portal, partner portal, to order products from a catalog. So the developer has already built a list of products that can be filtered using a gallery with pre-configured filters. And now he's built also the details for the product. And notice how the developer is configuring navigation between the different pages without any concern for logic for now. And sample data is visible in design time, allowing the developer to do a quick review over the overall experience. He's already built a a screen to submit an order, and now showing a shopping cart kind of interface to show the current selection that this partner would have done. Also, now is building the shipping details with an address to be able to ship the order. And lastly, is going to create a dashboard where you can see the list of current orders that have been built. This is the step where he's coding the navigation to that dashboard. Lastly, he's going to build the information architecture on the menu, dashboard, the catalog, and the shopping cart. So this iteration with the users starts here. Just looking at the flow of the application and building the wiring between the screens, you can already start iterating this with the users, making sure that the navigation is correct, that it fits the purpose of the intent of that user. And the data there is not very relevant for what is trying to achieve now, which is, let's see if the information flows correctly. Now, to adjust the application after validating this general flow of the application, what the developer is doing now, and this is a bit sped up because it's now logic, is actually doing the binding of pre-existing data and logic that comes from the portfolio of services that this organization already has, like adding products to the basket, or ordering, or price calculators that already are existing in the organization. Is reusing all of this from other projects that have already been using this logic. Replacing data is when you see the developer dragging an entity to the screen, not this exact moment. It's an intelligent mechanism. It heals the references from the database queries and the related entities that are bound to that specific entity. And it branches out and reaches the ramifications of those changes to the UI. The platform helps in flagging these changes that need an explicit decision for the developers so that it can actually address them and heal these errors. You'll notice that you just see some blocks that are added to adjust the use case. This allows for expanding the initial scenario that this screen was thought for in terms of the template, and is adjusting the use case to the specific need of this story. So now the final steps, binding all the remaining expressions to the new counters, and now publishing. So as you can see, the end result is a full functional application that can be actually put in the hands of the stakeholders and some users to do testing and eventually move this application live. This is where the feedback cycles start. And it's working. So getting the first version of the application in the hands of the users helps kickstarting this feedback loop. For this, we have a specific feature in the platform, which is application feedback. Is a tool to allow inside the application to provide feedback. This feedback can be negative, like this is not working, or it can be positive, like I would need a chart instead of this list that I have here. The idea is that you capture feedback in context. So when you do capture feedback, it goes into Jira as a screenshot with what the user was seeing at the moment, what browser he was using, and what is the context. So the idea is that you manage feedback immediately. And this cycle, as short as it is, it fosters adoption of the users. They get immediately engaged and willing to participate in building this application. Also, to measure the adoption of the application, you need to understand after the application is being put in the hands of more and more users. As Gonzalo mentioned, the application needs to be tracked, and the questions usually are usually left unanswered. Is the application being used? Are my users happy? And what do my users need next? And for that, this feedback comes in many shapes, like usage, satisfaction, business value. But from the big portfolio, you need to make fast decisions on what to change or what to fix, to prioritize and to maximize value from your applications. So to track impact of each iteration you release, this tool helps you measure engagement and satisfaction, and it opens feedback direct feedback from the users via a CSAT trigger that makes users part of your team, together with stakeholders and dev teams, to make sure that your application is being tracked correctly by who's using them and not who's having a hunch on how the application is being used. And the idea is that the success criteria is quantifiable and actionable. Also, with the big portfolio, prioritization is important. And to do prioritization, you need to understand what are the metrics that are relevant for your application. Either it's satisfaction or a CSAT trend or ratings. But at the glance, you should see where your effort should go next and decide which applications are going to be invested on. And even if some applications are still relevant, if they're still being used or have become obsolete and you haven't even realized it. Also, the last thing is you need to be able to measure business value. If you have applications that don't drive business value, they're not of much use. But to measure success from data and to hear from the users using that CSAT trigger on web application, on your experiments, or on different business models that you try, it holds the MVP dependent on these specific measures to decide on trial and error outcome, to decide if an experiment or an application or a business model that you've defined is good to go or not. So to summarize it a little bit, UX is always tailor-made to the context of each user, but you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Templates accelerate this fit-to-purpose application, as you understand from having a large portfolio where some screens can be reused. The other main idea is that you need to collect feedback as early as possible so that you can either fail fast or adjust fast. And also measure the impact of your applications. If the application is live and you don't do anything with it, you don't know if you've been successful just by launching the application live. So, Rachel, with what you've seen here, what do you think you can fine-tune in your UX process?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things I think that we'll be able to benefit from are the templates and the ability to start from a template for each project, mostly because a lot of our projects are in-house and they all kind of have this similar look and feel. If we have a template for each project, we can use those behaviors that we already tested and know work really well with our users over and over again for each new project, and that'll really jumpstart the UX process. The other thing I'm thinking of is in terms of accessibility. Those are already built into the frameworks as well, so we don't have to do that extra level of making sure our forms and elements and buttons and images are accessible. And then the analytics will help us determine what's working and what's not working on these high touch products for our future roadmap planning.
Okay, thank you. So just to wrap it up before we open for questions, I think the big idea that we want to bring to you here is that if you go back to UX and all those processes that come out of thinking about the users, trying to find what is the best solution, trying to iterate and so on, there's a lot of it which is to really have a great UX, you need to design really fit for purpose solutions. That basically creates a big expansion of your backlog. In this expansion, you'll never have enough UX specific resources, right? You'll miss UX specific people in your projects, in all of your projects, that can help you with each and every user story that you want to solve. So what you should really be doing is looking back into the user jobs, looking back into the outcomes that you want to achieve, use that to prioritize your backlog, and then iterate as rapidly as possible with your end users. So don't be afraid to having to put something that is not yet well fine-tuned in the hands of the users, because the sooner you get there, the better the solution will be. And this has a lot to do with how you can streamline your end-to-end delivery process so that you can open up room to do this iteration, to do these tests, to do the extra set of use cases that you need to build so that you have a fit-for-purpose solution. And this is really where we think that this modern way of doing UX with low code, by easily being able to come up with a design, with a solution, with real data that you can build, like you've seen, in a matter of minutes, by mashing up all the data that you have in different experiences, very well designed and based on pre-tested usability solutions, allows you to get that first MVP tested with users very quickly. Also, the ability to quickly publish your applications, make a change, republish and retest them with the end users is a key scenario that you need to make sure that in your app dev processes you streamline as much as possible. And in the end, make sure that as you put this, that you monitor not infrastructure metrics, not necessarily performance metrics, even though performance is very important for the usability of your application, but the actual satisfaction of your users with the solution that you provide, and then you iterate on that. And the best way to do this is really to try to compress these cycles as much as possible, automating the repetitive tasks, automating all those deployment processes so that you can continuously iterate with your end users. So with this, we'd like to leave you with some challenges for tomorrow. And this is really easy to do. Just pick one user, speak to him and understand what is one of his biggest struggles in their day-to-day work, and interview him and brainstorm with him a solution. This is something that you can do in 1 hour very quickly with someone that you already know. This is the first step to really create that empathy, to really be solving that user's problem. And next week, maybe you can prototype and test some of these specific solutions. So either mock up this solution and run it through him, or use low code, for instance, to create a quick MVP of that solution, publish and having using it live, and then based on that feedback and really by thinking about the outcomes, go back to your backlog and identify which are the ones that are really there to solve user problems, individual user problems. Maybe you need to break your backlog in different pieces, different use cases for different personas, and identify how you're going to measure success. Is it how fast they can complete a given task? Is it how satisfied they are? How adopted is the application? How easy it is to sign up for a product that you have in a B2C app? try to identify those specific outcomes, because that will be your kind of North Star metric as you do these iterations. And well, in a month, I think that it's very important to go back to your delivery process, include UX as a core practice. And again, you don't need very different skills and very different resources to do this. You need to bring the empathy in everyone that you have and have them collaborate with users to understand in detail the job that they need to be done. And then don't be afraid to come up with specific solutions. And that's why it's also important to review your own delivery process to shorten the lead time as much as possible, so that you can do these iterations very quickly, right? So that you can mock, so that you can implement a quick prototype, so that you can deploy it to your end users over and over again, and that you can change it over and over again. As you compress these change cycles, this is what is going to give you the biggest value to implement a solid UX process. So with this, we'd like to leave you with some resources from our blog that range from how easy or how different is user research for enterprise applications, to how you can quickly and easily create a customer journey from scratch and look into it and identify what are the biggest pain points, or how you can do these clickable prototypes, either low fidelity or high fidelity. These are relatively easy to do, and they don't add much more effort. It's much more effort to basically come up with a solution and then having to understand later on that it's not really what you should have been solving. And also some resources on how with UI frameworks that we package, even this design process, specifically in terms of the user interfaces that support the customer journey, can be compressed a lot. So like we've seen with a lot of reuse across 70% of the common use cases, you can really stop being afraid of tackling that big backlog, because there's a lot of it that is already done for you, and then you can modify to your specific needs or to the user specific needs. So with this, we invite you to try out Systems 11 at outsystems.com, and with this, opening up for questions.
Great. Thanks for a great presentation, guys. I believe we have time for 1 or 2 questions, but don't worry if we don't have time to get to your questions today during the webinar. You should expect a follow-up after the event. So do you guys have any suggestions on how we can track how the UX is performing?
Yeah, so the biggest suggestion is really getting to the voice of your end users, right? The purpose of the UX process is really to solve a user problem in the best possible way. For that, you need iterations. For that, you need interactions with the end users to understand how they're going. But the best way to track it is really through user satisfaction metrics, right? If they are happy, it's a very simple, again, like I was saying, a North Star metric that can guide your prioritization. If users are happy, and you can measure that by either asking them one by one or by using tools such as OutSystems that allows you to, within your application, ask for that feedback, understand where that feedback is being provided, and then have like a high-level view of what are the biggest areas of concern. You have there your guiding star to the UX process, and then you can look back and understand, okay, what went wrong here? It might have been that we didn't speak to the correct users, that we didn't test the correct use cases, but most of the times, if users are satisfied, then you're good in terms of UX. If users are not satisfied and provide like some feedback, it's very easy to understand where was the problem, because the feedback is very concrete.
Great. Now, one of our attendees says that they have a 18-year-old registrar systems with huge number of features, but the UI needs to be more configurable for different types of users, such as admin, faculty, and students. Do you have any suggestions on how they can address this?
Yeah, so this goes back to the core problem that we were discussing, right? So this is about the explosion of backlog, because you both have a large number of features, and then you have different personas that need to fulfill their jobs in different ways, right? So what is common is that to address all of this, we try to make them modular or configurable, or that you try to do a back office to show or hide some fields. Our suggestion here is that if you can actually accelerate this process of creating a specific use case to that specific screen, to that specific user, with a customized screen for that specific use case, then you can basically solve this problem in a completely different way, right? Because you'll be solving different use cases for different personas, like the admin, the faculty, the student. They need to be really designed for each individual need. And the only way to do that without trying to complexify everything in the same screen, in the same use case, is really by implementing one use case one by one. So as long as you can accelerate that production process and tackling your backlog use cases one by one, you can solve this. Otherwise, it's always going to be very hard to come up with a solution that is adaptable to every persona. You'll end up with the same problem you had in the old system that tried to solve everything in one screen.
Great, thanks. I believe that is all the time we're going to have for questions today. Again, that was Joao Granzina, Product Manager for OutSystems, Gonzalo Borrega, Head of Product for OutSystems, and also Rachel Bates, Associate Product Manager at bswift. I would also like to thank OutSystems for sponsoring today's event, as well as attendees for joining us today. Until next time, I'm Christina Cardoza with SC Times.